Hey there, Titans. I'm Chris Holcomb from 11 Alive. I'm the chief meteorologist at 11 Alive, and I'm so excited that I have the opportunity to read a book for the students at Ithaca Elementary School in Villa Rica. Now, I'm a weather guy, so I would like to read you a weather story. And have you heard of this one? I really love this book. It's called Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs. Now, I do the weather on TV every night, but I have never done a forecast like this, saying it's going to be cloudy with the chance of meatballs. So let's dive into this book and find out what it is all about. Now, I hope you're going to be able to see the pictures here. I'll try to show them to you, okay? Here we go. We were all sitting around the big kitchen table. It was Saturday morning, pancake morning. Mom was squeezing oranges for juice. Henry and I were betting on how many pancakes we each could eat, and Grandpa was doing the flipping. Seconds later, something flew through the air, headed toward the kitchen ceiling, and it landed right on Henry. He's got a pancake on his head. After we realized the flying object was only a pancake, we all laughed, even Grandpa. Breakfast continued quite uneventfully, and all the other pancakes landed right in the pan, and all of them were eaten, even the one that landed on Henry. Well, that night, touched off by the pancake incident at breakfast, Grandpa told us the best tall tale bedtime story he had ever told. Across an ocean, over lots of huge bumpy mountains, across 3 hot deserts and 1 smaller ocean, there lay the tiny town of Chew and Swallow. That's an interesting name of a town. In most ways, it was very much like any other town. It had a main street lined with stores, houses with trees and gardens around them, a schoolhouse, about 300 people, and some assorted cats and dogs. But there were no food stores in the town of Chew and Swallow. They didn't need any. The sky supplied all the food they could possibly want. The only thing that was really different about Chew and Swallow was its weather. It came 3 times a day, at breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Everything that everyone ate came from the sky. That would be cool. Whatever the weather served, that was what they ate. But it never rained rain, and it never snowed snow, and it never blew just wind. It rained things like soup and juice. It snowed mashed potatoes and green peas, and sometimes the wind blew in storms of hamburgers. Imagine a hamburger storm. The people could watch the weather report on television in the morning, and they would even hear a prediction for the next day's food. When the townspeople went outside, they carried their plates, cups, glasses, forks, spoons, knives, and napkins with them. And that way, they would always be prepared for the kind of weather. If they were leftovers, and there usually were, the people took them home and put them in their refrigerators in case they got hungry in between meals. The menu varied. By the time they woke up in the morning, breakfast was coming down. And after a brief shower of orange juice, low clouds of sunny side up eggs moved in, followed by pieces of toast. Butter and jelly sprinkled down for the toast, and most of the time it rained milk afterwards. For lunch one day, frankfurters, already in their rolls, blew in from the northwest at about 5 miles an hour. There were mustard clouds nearby. The winds shifted to the east and brought in baked beans. A drizzle of soda finished off the meal. I'm getting hungry. That sounds really good. Dinner one night consisted of lamb chops, becoming heavy at times, with occasional ketchup. Periods of peas and baked potatoes were followed by gradual clearing, with a wonderful Jell-O setting in the west. Look at the Jell-O setting in the west. The sanitation department of Chew and Swallow had a rather unusual job for sanitation department. It had to remove the food that fell on houses and sidewalks and lawns. The workers cleaned up after every meal and fed all of the dogs and the cats. Then they emptied some of it into the surrounding oceans for the fish and turtles and whales to eat. The rest of the food was put back on the earth so that the soil would be richer for people's flower gardens. Life for the townspeople was delicious until the weather took a turn for the worse. Look at that headline in the paper. One day, there was nothing but Gorgonzola cheese all day. The next day, there was only broccoli. All of it was overcooked. And the next day, there were Brussels sprouts and peanut butter with mayonnaise. Another day, there was pea soup fog. No one could even see where they were going, and they could barely find the rest of the meal that got stuck in the fog. That doesn't look good at all. The food was getting larger and larger, and so were the portions. The people were getting frightened. Violent storms blew up frequently, and awful things were happening. One Tuesday, there was a hurricane of bread and rolls all day long and into the night. There were soft rolls and hard rolls, and some with seeds and some without. There was white bread and rye and whole wheat toast. Most of it was larger than they had ever seen before, and the bread and rolls were too big. It was a terrible day. Everyone had to stay indoors. Roofs were damaged, and the sanitation department was beside itself. The mess took the workers 4 days to clean up, and the sea was full of floating rolls. To help out, the people piled up as much bread as they could in their backyards, and the birds picked at it at night, but it stayed there and got more and more stale. There was a storm of pancakes one morning and a downpour of maple syrup that nearly flooded the town. A huge pancake covered the school. Could you imagine that at your school, at Ithaca? No one could get it off because of its weight, so they had to close down the school. Lunch one day brought 15-inch drifts of cream cheese and jelly sandwiches. Everyone ate themselves sick, and the day ended with a stomachache. There was an awful salt and pepper wind, and it was accompanied by an even worse tomato tornado. People were sneezing themselves silly and running to avoid the tomatoes. The town was a mess. There were seeds and pulp everywhere. That is not fun. A tomato tornado? The sanitation department, they just gave up. The job was too big. Everyone feared for their lives. They couldn't go outside most of the time, and many houses had been badly damaged by giant meatballs. Stores were boarded up, and there was no more school for the children. So a decision was made to abandon the town of Chew and Swallow. It was a matter of survival. The people glued together the giant pieces of stale bread, sandwich style, with peanut butter. You see that? And they took the absolute necessities with them, and they set sail on their rafts for a new land. Interesting looking boat there. After being afloat for a week, they finally reached a small coastal town which welcomed them. The bread had held up surprisingly well enough for them to build a temporary house for themselves out of it. Look at these houses made of bread. The children began school again, and the adults all tried to find places for themselves in the new land. The biggest change that they had to make was getting used to buying food at a supermarket. They found it odd that the food was kept on shelves, packaged in boxes, cans, and bottles. Meat that had to be cooked had to be kept in refrigerators, and nothing came down from the sky except for rain and snow. The clouds above their heads were not made of fried eggs. No one ever got hit by a hamburger again. And nobody dared go back to the town of Chew and Swallow to find out what had happened to it. They were just too afraid. Henry and I were awake until the very end of Grandpa's story. I remember his goodnight kiss. The next morning, we woke up to see snow falling outside our window. We ran downstairs for breakfast and ate it a little faster than usual so we could go sledding with Grandpa. It's funny, but even as we were sliding down the hill, we thought we saw a giant pat of butter at the top, and we could almost smell mashed potatoes. Does that look like that? The end. All right, guys. I don't know that I'll ever go on TV and say that we're going to have cloudy skies with a chance of meatballs, but maybe if we ever found that town of Chew and Swallow, maybe I could get a job and say that.